Gyeongju is hosting this year's Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit. The APEC summit takes place in late October to early November this year. As a city that can best showcase South Korea's unique identity, Gyeongju may be seen as the root of Hallyu. With that in mind, today we want to take a look back at the history of the Korean wave from the period Korea joined APEC in 1989 until today. We're going to do that with Professor David Tizzard at Seoul Women's University and Hanyang University, who is now connected with us. Hello, Professor Tizzard.
Hello, Professor.
Good afternoon. It's great to see you both again.
Great to have you again on the show. Now, Professor Tizzard, Korea joined APEC in 1989. Back then, no one really spoke about the Korean wave like we do today. There might have been some Korean songs that have become known overseas after the 1988 Seoul Olympics. But could you first give us an overall assessment of Korean culture before and after the late 1980s?
It's a wonderful question. So when we look at when Korea joined APEC in 1989, there were, as your other guest Gonu said, there were no North Korean singers, there were no AI assistants to help us. There wasn't even really K-pop. But perhaps the most important thing that happened in 1989, which is heavily related to everything that's happened since, is that on January 1st, 1989, South Korean people were for the first time freely allowed to embark on international travel. They were allowed to go to Gimpo Airport. They were allowed to choose where they wanted to go, whether it were to Europe and see the Eiffel Tower, to Japan, to Latin America, or to sub-Saharan Africa. They could go where they wanted. And we sometimes forget that sort of Korea has only really been interacting with the wider world for only about the last 35 years. It's only been a democracy for that long as well. So everything that's happened since then has been a real explosion of culture, interaction, and globalization. If you go back to the 1980s when all this was taking place, certainly K-pop wasn't a thing. The 1980s were marked locally, domestically, I should say, by singers dressed in suits and long evening gowns. And this was in stark contrast to the folk music of the 1970s. If you look at the 1980s, perhaps my favorite singer of that would be Lee Moon-se, but really big around that time was Byun Jin-sop. He had a couple of songs. Himang Sahang was probably one of the biggest ones. Heavy metal was popular, but perhaps what we see today we might trace back to a group called Sobangcha. They're sometimes cited by music critics as being the first K-pop group, and while they might look a little bit peculiar to us today, this was one of the first times they debuted in 1987 of seeing Korean people singing and dancing to music on stage.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but in the late 1990s, when I had a very ugly undercut haircut and following all the boy bands at the time, the Korean wave began to take off. Why did it take off around that time, do you think?
Well, I'm pleased to say, Walter, that you still look like a boy band member. Well done.
Thank you.
You've got that going strong. The late 1990s was marked by the Asian financial crisis, and this was a big hit to not just South Korea, but to Japan, to Singapore, to Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, and beyond. And it was really a really turbulent time. South Korea had already sort of started creating K-pop. Sotaji was way back in 1992. But what many people say, and I agree with this, the start of Hallyu. This is Korean products going abroad and achieving success. It was a Korean drama called Gyeongju, or Winter Sonata as it's known in English. This was released in 2002, and it just became the biggest hit in Japan. It's like what Blackpink are doing Spotify charts today, or like Rise are doing as well. People in Japan, because of this one drama, and particularly because of the male actor Bae Young-jun, they started learning Korean language. They started buying calendars and CDs and poka, photo cards. They started coming to Korea to visit the locations, Nami Island and beyond. So this was really kind of the start of Hallyu, and it all began in Japan. It's worth also remembering, just in case you're not aware, that until 2002, there was a cultural ban in Korea on Japanese products. So while many of us grew up with Sony and Nintendo and Sonic and Mario, Pokemon, all of these things, that wasn't a thing in Korea. So this explosion really is very new.
겨울연가, 배용준, and 서태지. So many things that are evoking nostalgia here, Professor Tizzard. But now let's travel to year 2005. South Korea hosted its first APEC in the city of Busan back then. And it's also around that time that the Korean wave, or Hallyu, really started to get going. So what triggered that?
Yeah, and there is a lot of history. I know many people are interested in the groups that are creating waves today, and that's very important. Sometimes you need an old guy like me to tell you about history. And 2005 is an important year for me as well, personally, because that was the year that I first arrived in South Korea. I've been here 20 years. And when I did arrive, people were still sort of taken aback by seeing foreigners walking down the streets. They would point at me, young children, and say, "미국인 온다," and say, "There's an American." And I would sort of tell them that. But at that time in 2005, K-pop wasn't really even called K-pop in Korea. That started coming about 2 or 3 years later. And it's also worth pointing that K-pop and Hallyu, these are both foreign terms. These come from Chinese, Taiwan, Hong Kong journalists talking about this spread abroad. Internal in the country, 2005, you've got to look. This is kind of second generation K-pop, and it's at a time where you could hear K-pop on the radio, in the taxis, in the bars, on the streets. It's kind of called the golden age for a reason, because it was not only so big domestically here, and you're looking at groups like Super Junior, TVXQ, Dongbang Shingi, but it was starting to spread abroad. This was when the music, it was first the dramas, but then the music started going to places like Japan, like Taiwan, like the Philippines, really into Southeast Asia. And so while the rest of the world sort of has been catching up with Blackpink and these groups in the last few years, Asia's been on the scene for K-pop and Hallyu a lot longer.
Well, let's say back in 2005, which Korean concert was popular around that time then?
There was one of the more interesting ones was Korean hip hop was pretty popular at the time. So Teddy Park, the producer of YG, he's done sort of a lot of Blackpink, a lot of Big Bang music, and you could hear his work all over the Demon Hunters soundtrack. It stands out a mile. He was pretty popular with his group One Time, Hot Duga Ha. He was the lead rapper of that. Epic High were also really big. So Korean hip hop was a thing back in 2005. You also have current artists that we might know now from television. Lee Hyori made her debut in that year, and she went on to become her solo debut, I should say. She was in Finkel before that, but she sort of became the nation's diva. Boa was just dominating, and I'm teaching a Hallyu course at the moment. All of my students are so deep into the K-pop culture. They asked me, "Professor, what is a boa?" And so this is someone, she was just #1 in both countries. Super Junior's Sorry was everywhere. But it is worth saying something about Korean movies, because I haven't done that. By 2005, Park Chan-wook was the darling of the world, because his films like JSA and Old Boy had been getting recognition from people like Quentin Tarantino, Martin Scorsese abroad. So definitely the Hallyu thing had started across all mediums by then.
And now, Professor, 2 decades later, year 2025, Korea is going to host APEC in Gyeongju, which is often referred to as the museum without walls. So first off, how would you describe the city of Gyeongju?
It's really very difficult to describe the city, but I would describe it as a spiritual place, a religious place. And you know, Korea is, despite the changes with the new K-pop groups, and we see the identity of the North Koreans, the Korean Americans and beyond, which is wonderful, Korea is quite ethnically homogenous. At least that's the story it's told itself. But at the same time, Korea is multi-religious. This is a country, a civilization that has built its roots on shamanism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Christianity, and secularism. And if you spend a lot of time in Seoul or maybe Busan, you won't feel much of the shamanism, of the Buddhism or the Sanshin that live in the mountains. But if you go to Gyeongju, wow, that's where this comes alive. That's when you see the more traditional side, the more spiritual side. I find the pace of life there is a lot slower. The photos you take are a lot different. So it's a place where you can not only remember Korea's history, but also remember diversity of cultures and traditions that South Korea has built its modernity on. And I think that's a very important lesson for us all.
Now, Professor Tizzard, comparing Korea's culture from when the first APEC summit took place in 2005 to now in 2025, how do you see has Hallyu evolved? And also, as we're talking about APEC, do you think that international events like APEC have an impact on Hallyu itself or the popularity of Hallyu?
Do the events like APEC have an impact on Hallyu? Well, research, and I agree with this, will show not directly, because the fans of Hallyu are not kind of interested in APEC, and sometimes celebrities or singers are brought in to promote these things, and it can sometimes seem a bit random and have the opposite effect. What you're looking at with something like APEC is you're going to get a different crowd come in. These might be diplomats, business people, people that are not normally your target K-drama, K-movie, or K-pop audience. But when they come into Korea, they're going to be on an airline that's going to be offering them movies and dramas and music. They're going to be people that, as they come here, they're going to want to learn more about the place. They're going to pick up books and magazines. And this is really important because it really spreads Korea's influence through a different demographic. And then another really important thing is that while the people are here for APEC, what they'll be doing is they'll be posting photos. I'm not sure if APEC people have Insta, but at least on LinkedIn and things like that. And then other people will see these photos. And the beauty of Korea and the story of Korea will be spread through a completely different demographic and part of society. So I think while it may not have the glitz and the glamour of a K-pop concert or a red carpet event for a movie, this is really important because, Korea has been working towards being able to host these events for a long time. And that the world is willing to come here and embrace Korea, it's just such a very wonderful thing. And I really think it will help the country.
Right, and these days we also have K-pop stars playing the role as ambassadors of things like APEC. Well, thank you very much, Professor Tizzard. That's all the time we have today. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for the nostalgia. See you next time.
And thank you, Walter, as always. We're going to see you back here tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.